Serena Jackson had just arrived at Meadow Ridge High, transferring from a rough part of the city whispered about for its danger. Growing up where speaking up risked being jumped and kindness was mistaken for weakness, she stepped onto the pristine campus, her presence sparking both envy and scorn. The halls, immaculate and lightly scented with lemon, sharply contrasted the gritty life she knew. Serena's quiet determination only fueled the cruelty of her peers, especially a group led by Austin Riddell and his cronies Kyle and Brandon. Their hateful taunts and racist slurs cut deep as they escalated their bullying day by day, whispering insults like ghetto and hood school through the corridors. Even her locker, stuffed with shredded paper bearing venomous messages, symbolized relentless prejudice. Yet beneath her sorrow and silent resilience, a fierce desire for justice simmered. With each degrading act, Serena's resolve grew stronger, and her plans for a monumental, awe-inspiring comeback took shape. It was a slow burn of determination destined to transform her suffering into a breathtaking act of revenge, one that would leave her tormentors stunned and onlookers in quiet admiration. One day, Serena will boldly shatter the oppressors and reclaim her rightful dignity. Serena Jackson felt a chill run down her spine as she met Principal Hughes in the pale early light of a Wednesday morning. The principal, a dignified man with skin as dark as rich southern earth and eyes that carried the weight of unspoken stories, wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. He greeted her in a soft, measured tone that cut through the tension of the day. He said, "If anyone crosses the line, come to me and I'll handle it the right way." His quiet confidence resonated deep within Serena as she stepped onto the bus, feeling both the weight of her past and the promise of change. Sitting by the window, the gentle hum of the engine and the sight of neat suburban houses passing by served as a stark contrast to the hostile world that awaited her inside the school. The grey, overcast sky seemed to press down on everything, mirroring the heavy, silent judgment of her peers as she entered the building. That day, the hallways buzzed with a slow, ominous energy, every whispered glance and sidelong stare a reminder that she was seen as an outsider. In art class during 6th period, while her classmates lost themselves in sketches and watercolors, the room's air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. Miss Henley, the teacher, was off discussing portfolio submissions in a far corner, leaving the students to their own devices. Serena sat near the back, carefully tracing soft lines on her paper to calm her racing thoughts, when suddenly she felt an unexpected tug at her scalp. In a flash, she realized that her long, cherished braid, symbolic of her heritage and strength, had been viciously cut by a pair of dull scissors. Brandon, one of the relentless tormentors, held the severed braid aloft as if it were a trophy, while Kyle and even Austin exchanged looks that spoke of cruel amusement. The shard of her hair lay in her palm like a broken promise, its presence both painful and defiant. In that long, heart-stopping moment, Serena's mind raced back to the lessons of her past, a whispered memory of her cousin's advice to never wait when justice beckoned. Slowly, she rose from her seat and turned to face Brandon with a calm that belied the storm within her. In a clear, steady voice that cut through the charged silence, she declared, "You do not get to touch me or steal my dignity." His attempt at a weak apology fell flat as she delivered a swift, resounding right hook that landed square on his cheekbone. The force of the blow sent him crashing against an art table, scattering jars of paint and eliciting gasps from the stunned onlookers. When Kyle lunged in a desperate bid to regain control, Serena intercepted his attack with a quick twist of his arm, forcing him to cry out in pain. Even Austin, who had tried to stand between them, could only step back as his once cocky expression turned to one of wary fear. In that moment, the classroom transformed from a stage of humiliation into an arena where Serena reclaimed her power. The echoes of cruelty faded, replaced by an air of reluctant respect and astonishment. Walking out of that room, bruised yet unbowed, Serena Jackson left behind the severed braid and spilled paint as symbols not of defeat, but of a battle fiercely fought and won. Serena Jackson stood in the wreckage of room 316 as if time itself had paused. The art classroom was in utter chaos. Paint bottles lay overturned like shattered dreams, chairs were knocked askew, and scraps of paper fluttered to the ground as if trying to escape the calamity. In the midst of it all, Serena clutched the severed braid in her hand, a symbol of her identity, her heritage, and the cruelty inflicted upon her. Around her, students gaped in wide-eyed disbelief while some fumbled with their phones, torn between the urge to help and the fear of getting involved. Even Miss Henley, who had until then seemed lost in her own distracted conversations, finally snapped into action. She lunged for the intercom at her desk and barked into it. "We need assistance in room 316, right now. Security, now." Yet Serena, calm and composed despite the violence that had just unfolded, remained rooted in place. She did not run, did not scream. She simply gathered that sacred strand of hair as if it were a cherished relic, and strode out of the classroom with measured, echoing steps along the linoleum corridor. Her shoes clicked in a steady rhythm that contrasted sharply with the rising tumult of shouting students and panicked footsteps echoing behind her. As she walked down the hall, escorted by campus officers and an assistant principal whose voices were sharp with commands, Serena's expression was one of profound sorrow mingled with steely resolve. She allowed herself no protest when they ushered her toward the main office, her silence louder than any cry. The hallway outside the main office had already filled with anxious students who leaned against walls and strained to catch snippets of conversation. Whispers floated like dissonant notes. Someone murmured her name, while another speculated about the brutal act. Lily cut her hair. That one statement, uttered in hushed tones, rippled through the crowd like static, setting the stage for the confrontation that was to come. Inside the principal's office, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Darnell Hughes, the school principal known for his calm authority and a presence that commanded respect without raising his voice, waited for Serena. Dressed in dark slacks and a crisp grey button-up with sleeves rolled to his elbows, he exuded quiet dignity. As Serena entered, the office door closed softly behind her, sealing her fate for what felt like an inescapable reckoning. Without a hint of theatrics, Principal Hughes gestured toward the chair opposite his desk and said, "Sit down, Serena." She obeyed, her body rigid with the weight of the day's events, the severed braid still held tightly in her hand. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper, a reminder of long, weary hours spent grappling with problems that went far beyond misplaced scissors or classroom pranks. Principal Hughes began by reading from the report provided by Ms. Henley, his tone measured and deliberate. "I read the report from the art teacher," he stated, his voice even yet heavy with implication. "You attacked 3 students, one of them now has a broken nose, and another is being sent for x-rays on his arm." Serena's eyes fell to the floor for a moment, not out of shame but in quiet contemplation. Then she looked up, her voice soft and tired as she replied, "They cut my hair." The simplicity of her words, so ordinary yet so charged, filled the room with a heavy silence. Principal Hughes nodded as if the words confirmed a long-held suspicion. He leaned forward, studying her with a patience that bordered on compassion, and asked, "Why?" Her response came in a whisper, a mixture of sorrow and resignation. "Because I sat still all those times. Because I let them take what they thought was mine." She uncurled her hand slowly, revealing the frayed, uneven end of the braid. A part of her identity that had been desecrated over and over again by a system that tolerated racism and cruelty. Principal Hughes' eyes darkened with the memory of his own battles, and he said quietly, "I figured that's what it was." He recounted how he had watched the security feed from the hallway, noting with quiet disbelief that she had not run, had not resisted until it reached a breaking point. "You did not run," he said. "You did not resist. You waited. And in that waiting, they grew bolder. They laughed louder." Serena's silence deepened as she recounted the endless barrage of insults, the casual racism, the whispered jabs about her background, the degrading comparisons to a life she had long left behind. "I have walked away 100 times, she said, her voice a mixture of numbness and determination, but every time I did, they pushed harder. Every time I ignored them, they laughed louder, and their cruelty became more vicious." She held up the severed braid once more, as if to illustrate that this was not just about hair, it was about identity, respect, and the unyielding demand to be seen as human. "It's never just hair," she murmured, her eyes not meeting his but fixed on a distant memory of pain and loss. Principal Hughes leaned back, his gaze softening for a moment as he recalled the words of his own grandmother. "My grandmother used to braid my cousin's hair every Sunday," he said, voice low and laden with meaning. "She said it was part of our crown, a symbol that no one could take it without a fight, and if you wear it with pride, if you truly know what it means, then no one can steal your spirit." His words, spoken with the quiet authority of a man who had seen too much injustice to ever turn away, seemed to buoy Serena's spirit, even as the room remained heavy with the scent of impending retribution. Before the conversation could descend further into the personal and painful, the quiet murmur of the outside world intruded. By the time Serena was escorted out of the principal's office, word had already spread like wildfire. In the school parking lot the next morning, as the pale light of sunrise struggled to warm the chill in the air, a convoy of sleek black SUVs, a polished silver Lexus, and a crisp white BMW rolled in with an air of determined dignity. These were not the vehicles of typical faculty. They belonged to parents, community leaders, and concerned citizens who were prepared to demand accountability. Principal Hughes, ever the steady hand amid chaos, stood near the main entrance, sipping his coffee slowly while watching the storm gather beyond the tall windows. Soon, 3 mothers and 3 fathers assembled in the conference room, their expensive coats and glittering watches a stark counterpoint to the raw emotion of the events. As Principal Hughes entered the room, the tension was palpable. One of the mothers, a blonde in a red blazer with a string of pearls, fixed him with a steely gaze that spoke of disappointment and barely concealed anger. "You're Principal Hughes," she said coolly, as though the title itself was a question. He replied simply, "I am," nodding once as if to underline the gravity of the situation. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife, until a broad-shouldered man in a tailored suit and tan trench coat stepped forward, his voice resonant with indignation. "Let's skip the pleasantries," he demanded. "My son came home with a busted nose and a black eye. Explain to me why the girl responsible isn't locked up." Principal Hughes' response was calm and measured. "She has been suspended for 3 days, out of school," he stated, his tone as even as the surface of a still lake, which is standard protocol for physical altercations resulting in injury. The room erupted in dissent. The blonde woman snapped, "That wasn't an altercation, it was a savage attack." Her words hung in the air as another father interjected, demanding, "You're defending her? I want to know what exactly happened." In response, Principal Hughes spoke slowly, deliberately, his voice resonating with a mix of authority and moral conviction. "I'm not here to defend her," he said firmly. "I'm here to state the facts. Your sons approached a student in class, using a pair of scissors as a weapon, but what happened in that room was a response, a measured reaction to a long history of racist abuse and degradation." His eyes locked with those of the assembled parents, conveying the weight of every unspoken injustice Serena had suffered. Serena Jackson has spent her whole life fighting against the tide of cruelty and racism, and today she was pushed to the edge. When you ignore the subtle, everyday demeaning actions that strip a person of their dignity, eventually a response becomes inevitable. The room fell silent again as Principal Hughes continued, "I have decided that today I will not let bureaucracy silence the truth. I will file my own report, and I will demand that we re-examine our policies that allow such cruelty to persist in our schools." His voice softened as he added, "You see, when someone as brave as Serena stands up against hate, even in the midst of chaos, the message is clear. No one, no matter how deeply rooted their prejudice, should ever have the power to strip another of their honor without facing consequences." Serena listened from the edge of that conversation, her grip on the severed braid loosening ever so slightly as a small spark of hope ignited within her. The words of Principal Hughes resonated like a balm to her battered spirit. She had been fighting alone for so long, enduring endless ridicule and degrading acts, that the realization she was not alone in this battle had finally come to light. The administrative support and the promise of retribution, both subtle and fierce, offered her a glimpse of a future where her dignity might be restored. In that conference room where the polished veneers of the parents' concerns met the raw honesty of a man who had long balanced duty with decency, a fragile alliance was forming. Principal Hughes, with quiet determination, reminded everyone present that the fight against racism and cruelty was not one fought with fists alone, but with the courage to speak out and demand change. As he slid a plain manila envelope containing her suspension paperwork across the desk, his final words lingered in the charged air. "You do not have to fight alone anymore." Serena Jackson, no longer merely a quiet girl forced to endure unspeakable torment, felt the stirring of a resolve that promised not just survival, but a monumental, awe-inspiring comeback. In that moment, the severed braid was transformed from a symbol of degradation into a rallying cry for justice. It was a promise that one day, every sneer, every racist remark, and every act of cruelty would be met with a response so grand that it would leave even the most hardened oppressors utterly speechless. Monica Rivers had endured too much already, and that day in the conference room felt like the tipping point of a long, painful battle against cruelty and racism. The evidence was clear. A pair of school-issued scissors had been used to cut her hair without her consent. An act so callous it could only be described as assault, humiliation, and emotional violence. A blonde woman at the meeting hissed, "You're trying to justify violence against white students," her voice trembling with a mix of entitlement and fear. Principal Hughes, his tone sharpening, replied evenly, "I'm trying to justify truth." One of the men stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous as he declared, "We have been generous with this school and this district. I sit on the school board and my firm sponsors your athletics department. Now my son is afraid to come to school because you are allowing a girl with a chip on her shoulder to attend here." Monica's presence, the mark of someone who had suffered endless degradation, had ignited a storm among these entitled parents. Hughes interrupted calmly, "You are not angry because your sons were attacked. You are angry because someone fought back, and you were not prepared for what that looked like." The silence that followed vibrated with barely contained fury from people who had spent their entire lives believing their opinions were above reproach. One of the mothers shook her head slowly, speaking with cold clarity. "You realize this is going to escalate, don't you? We are not going to let this go. Not after what she did. Not after the media gets wind of it." Hughes said simply, "I am counting on it." He circled the conference table slowly, deliberately, his voice softening just enough so that every word hit home. "Once the media sees the footage of 3 boys surrounding a girl in class, cutting her hair, laughing and threatening her, the public will understand why she defended herself. And if not the media, then the courts will. I have already submitted the footage to the district superintendent." A father pointed a finger and threatened, "You will lose your job over this," to which Hughes smiled faintly. "If I do, it will be for doing the right thing." The parents left without another word, but soon their anger manifested in a flurry of emails, filled with sharp language and veiled threats about campus safety, district standards, and donor support. Hughes meticulously printed every message, filing them by name and timestamp, all while including a copy of the video that showed Austin leaning back with a smirk and Brandon hovering behind Monica with those very scissors. And the moment her braid was nonchalantly taken as if it meant nothing. The footage was not graphic, it did not show blood or raised fists, yet its implications were far more damning. 4 days later, Monica returned to school. She walked through the front doors with her back straight and her face unreadable, the whispers trailing behind her like smoke. Teachers avoided eye contact and students exchanged cautious glances as if she were a living question they did not dare answer. That afternoon, Principal Hughes called her into his office again. He showed her printed photos and screenshots from security footage, and then slid a thin, spiral-bound notebook across the desk. "I have sent this to the superintendent and drafted a report to submit to the state," he explained. "But there is a pattern here. I want you to document every incident, every name, every time a teacher looks away or a student pushes things too far. They underestimated you and assumed you were alone. Now let us make your truth undeniable." Monica nodded slowly, clutching the notebook like a hidden weapon, determined that her quiet resistance would soon become a rallying cry for justice. Monica Rivers watched the soft amber of the sunset reflect off the dark glass as she stood alone in Principal Hughes's office. The front desk was dark now, and without a word, He simply nodded toward the door and said quietly, "Lock it." Monica obeyed, not questioning his silent command. When he turned back, he gestured to a small folder on his desk. "Someone sent this to me anonymously," he explained. Monica opened the folder to reveal a string of emails written in coded language, but the message was unmistakable. Teachers were discussing recurring discipline problems linked to students from less structured homes. And one email read aloud in a flat, cold tone, "Some of these girls come in here looking for trouble." Another insisted they needed structure, not sympathy. These words, coming from a faculty member on her third senior rotation, the very same one who had ignored Brandon's first incident, spoke of a systematic plan against her. "They're building a case against me," she murmured, her jaw tightening. Principal Hughes nodded once and replied, "Not just against you. Against everything that threatens their version of order, even if it is the truth." He continued, "So what now?" And Monica listened as he explained they would watch for fractures in the system. 2 days later, Reggie Hollett, a quiet, unassuming janitor known for his integrity, stopped Monica in the hallway just as the last bell rang. His eyes darted around nervously before he said in a low voice, "I saw what happened in the art room while I was fixing a light fixture. I've seen this before, not the scissors, but the aftermath, the way they twist it, the way it eats people alive." Monica's heart pounded, and his words confirmed what she already knew. The cruelty wasn't random, it was planned. Over the next few days, small torments escalated into a relentless campaign. At lunch, Monica sat alone with her tray by a window that let in just enough light to keep her in half shadow. A grape rolled across her table, a balled-up napkin landed nearby, and a plastic fork clattered onto her tray with deliberate timing. Monica recorded every detail in her worn notebook: the time, the direction from which the grape came, the mocking whispers of Brandon, and the calculated tone of Austin asking, "Why don't you smile?" When she finally lifted her eyes, Austin's confident facade wavered, just long enough for her steady gaze to meet his before he hurriedly looked away. Unable to contain the burning coil of rage in her chest, Monica left the cafeteria and made her way to the main office. Standing silently near a glass case of trophies for what felt like an eternity, she refused to budge until Principal Hughes emerged. When he finally did, with his jacket off and sleeves rolled up, he asked quietly, "You all right?" Monica simply replied, "Now I am." She slid her notebook across his desk, open to the latest page filled with precise notes and even a mapped blind spot in the lunchroom. Hughes read every word with measured intensity before saying, "They don't think they're being watched. They think no one cares." He then pulled out his phone and said, "I'll request the lunchroom footage before anyone can tamper with it, but we need witnesses. I'll go first if I must." Monica's eyes burned with quiet resolve as she agreed. Together they drafted a detailed report, timestamps and all. By week's end, the unedited footage showed her tormentors laughing, tossing food and mocking her with the chilling question, "Why don't you smile?" It was clear evidence. A local journalist, Lena Mercer, a determined reporter with a history of exposing injustice, soon reached out. Monica agreed to a modest sit-down interview in the empty media room after school, her voice calm but unyielding. In that quiet, golden space, Monica Rivers prepared to give her truth a microphone, determined to transform each small act of cruelty into a resounding call for justice that would leave even the most hardened oppressors speechless. Veronica King sat across from Lena Mercer in a modest media room, the soft hum of fluorescent lights and distant echoes of an empty school hall setting the stage for a conversation that would change everything. Lena pressed record and said, "Say only what you want, no more, no less." Veronica, though clearly tired, held herself with a calm precision that betrayed a history of hard-fought battles. She did not recount the fight itself, but spoke instead of the cold, watchful eyes that followed her every step, the relentless mockery that had pierced her soul. She described the moment she had retreated to a bathroom stall after her cherished braid was viciously cut by those who claimed it was just a joke. Staring at the broken strands in her hand, she recalled how the laughter outside the stall was not boisterous but sharp and cutting, a sound that seemed to split her skin. Veronica did not cry. She did not tremble. Instead, her voice carried the weight of someone who had endured the worst and was no longer asking for pity. When Lena asked what she hoped would come from all this, Veronica's reply was measured and clear. "I want the truth to stop being quiet." The interview aired quietly on a local outlet's YouTube page, paired with an article titled, "Student Speaks After Haircutting Incident Sparks Controversy at Local High School." It wasn't sensational or viral, but its clarity spread like oil across water. By Monday, concerned parents were calling the school not to complain, but to ask hard questions. Rumors flew about past complaints, and a former teacher anonymously admitted she had once reported Brandon harassing a Somali student, only to be told to simply document it and move on. An email thread circulated among parents where a guidance counselor and a dean dismissed racial tension with a flippant remark about not inflaming things unnecessarily. Even Miss Chandler, the young English teacher who had dared ask questions at a staff meeting, shared the interview on social media with the stark caption, "This isn't new, this is just finally visible." Soon after, Veronica learnt she had been quietly reassigned from her committee, a move that sent shockwaves through the student body. By Wednesday, the superintendent had scheduled a mandatory meeting, and by Friday, the school board issued a statement promising an independent review of campus disciplinary practices. Throughout these turbulent days, Veronica moved through the halls with the same deliberate composure. Her shoulders remained square and her gaze steady. Silence, once interpreted as defiance, had transformed into a silent authority that left everyone else scrambling for explanations. Then came the day when the district released its preliminary review update, a single damning sentence acknowledging that multiple complaints involving the same group of students had been ignored and mishandled. The fallout was swift. Security footage leaked online showed the moment Austin threw a plastic fork, accompanied by mocking laughter and a derisive, "Why don't you smile?" Now, even within the circle of her tormentors, voices began to crack. A sophomore girl revealed her own harrowing experience with Kyle, and a former student detailed how the same boy had followed her to her car without consequence. Later that week, in a narrow district hearing under harsh fluorescent lights, Veronica was offered the chance to speak at a press conference. Initially hesitant, she realized that by speaking up she would make the truth permanent. Outside, amid the steady drizzle and under the watchful eyes of parents and community organizers, she accepted her new role. And as she prepared for that final conversation, one she knew she had to have with Austin, the only one among her tormentors who remained, Veronica King felt for the first time that her silence had not been a mark of weakness, but a call to reclaim her dignity once and for all. Olivia Grant found him in the back lot after school, leaning against his car with his phone in hand and earbuds dangling from his collar, head bowed in quiet shame. His once confident swagger had evaporated, replaced by a cautious awareness that followed him into every classroom, every hallway, and every glance from his peers. As her long shadow stretched across his feet, he looked up with unmistakable fear. Olivia said quietly, "I'm not here to fight." She stood there in silence, letting the quiet stretch between them until he looked at her as a person, not a threat. "Have you ever thought about why you did it?" she asked softly. His brow furrowed as he stammered, "Cut my hair, said what you said, laughed when they did it." His voice was barely a whisper as he admitted, "It was supposed to be a joke." Olivia nodded slowly and said, "You assumed nothing would happen, that I would simply accept it, that someone like me has no right to dignity." She continued, "I don't need your apology. I just want you to understand, you did not break me, you revealed your true self." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of his cruelty. She walked away, proud and unbroken. Veronica King did not rewrite history, she planted a mark, a scar that would never fade. 2 weeks later, Austin transferred with no fanfare, his locker emptied and his influence gone, leaving a void in the halls that had once upheld a cruel hierarchy. Veronica's victory was measured not in retribution, but in her presence that shattered the old order. She walked into the cafeteria with unwavering dignity, and when a timid new student recognized her courage, she offered a quiet nod and an invitation to share the strength she had cultivated. At home, her parents observed a subtle transformation, a newfound serenity warming their hearts, like a comforting cup of tea on a chilly evening. Veronica's days at the boxing gym became a testament to her resilience as she trained with deliberate strength. In the final weeks of the semester, the school slowly shifted. Teachers and students alike began to honor her without fear or pretense. Standing beneath the school's motto of excellence through community, Veronica knew she was no longer defined by their cruelty. She was whole, a monument to perseverance, and her legacy would inspire change for years to come. Her story lives on, a beacon of hope.